On Thanksgiving, my son-in-law snarled across the table, "Skip Christmas, you worthless burden." I stood up silently, smiled, and walked out, leaving them to enjoy their perfect holiday alone. But at midnight, my daughter called in sheer panic. "Dad, you're on every CNN screen. What have you done?" Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Robert Wilson Turner. I'm 64 years old, living in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. Spent most of my adult life working in investment banking at Goldman Sachs before retiring 2 years ago. I always believed that family was everything, that loyalty ran deeper than blood. Turns out I was naive. My daughter Lindsay is 33 now. She used to be my little girl, the one who'd wait by the window for me to come home from work, who'd share her dreams over Sunday morning pancakes. Smart, ambitious, beautiful. She became a PR manager at one of those big agencies in Midtown. I was so proud of her. Then 4 years ago, she met Christopher Morrison. Everyone calls him Chris. Chris is 37, a vice president of corporate development at some tech company called NextGen Solutions. Tall, sharp suits, expensive watch that gleams under restaurant lights. The kind of man who shakes hands like he's closing a deal, who smiles with his mouth but not his eyes. When Lindsay first brought him home, I noticed how he talked about his achievements, his connections, his future plans. Never asked me a single question about myself. Just nodded politely when Lindsay mentioned I used to work in finance, like he was humoring a child's story. The first year was tolerable. Chris played the role well enough, showed up for holidays, brought wine, complimented my apartment's view of Central Park. But I saw the calculation behind those gestures, the way he'd steer Lindsay away when I tried to talk to her alone. The subtle comments about how I should enjoy retirement and not worry so much about them. By their second anniversary, the mask started slipping. Chris began suggesting I was too involved in Lindsay's life, that I called too often, that my advice was outdated for their generation. Lindsay, bless her heart, tried to balance both of us. She'd apologize for her husband's terseness, make excuses about work stress. I watched my daughter slowly pull away, convinced by this man that her father was somehow intrusive. The worst part? I saw how Chris looked at Lindsay's connections, her network, her last name. Turner carries weight in certain New York circles. He knew it. I knew it. But Lindsay couldn't see it yet. Thanksgiving dinner this year was at the Manor, this upscale place on Park Avenue where they charge $45 for a turkey plate and call it artisanal. Lindsay had made the reservation weeks ago. "Just the three of us, Dad," she'd said on the phone, and I'd heard the hope in her voice. Hope that maybe this time we could be a real family. I arrived exactly on time, wearing my navy blazer and the tie Lindsay gave me last Christmas. Chris was already nursing his second glass of Cabernet when I sat down. He barely looked up from his phone. "Robert," he said, "not Dad, never Dad. How's retirement treating you?" "Can't complain," I replied, settling into my chair. "Keeps me busy enough." Lindsay squeezed my hand across the table. She looked tired, I noticed, shadows under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite hide. "Dad, you look great. Have you been walking in the park?" "Every evening," I said. "Good for the mind." The meal started pleasantly enough. We talked about Lindsay's latest campaign, some luxury brand launching a new fragrance. Chris ordered another glass of wine, then another. His cheeks flushed red. He started talking louder, gesturing more dramatically. Lindsay touched his arm gently, a warning I recognized. He shrugged her off. "You know what, Robert?" Chris leaned back in his chair, that expensive watch catching the light. "I've been thinking, maybe you should skip Christmas this year. Give us some space. Just Lindsay and me." The restaurant noise seemed to fade. I watched Lindsay's face go pale. "Chris, we talked about this," she whispered urgently. He ignored her, his eyes locked on mine. The wine had loosened his tongue, brought out what he'd been thinking all along. "Let's be honest. You're a burden. A worthless burden to this family. Every holiday, every dinner, you're there. Don't you have your own life? Your own friends?" Lindsay's mouth opened, closed. She looked between us, frozen, waiting, I realized, for me to defend myself, to fight back, to cause a scene. I did none of those things. Instead, I folded my napkin carefully, placed it beside my untouched turkey. I stood up slowly, reaching for my wallet. The waiter appeared, concerned. "Is everything all right, sir?" "Everything's perfect," I said, pulling out $300 bills and handing them to him. "For your trouble, and your excellent service." The waiter's eyes widened. Chris stared at the money, then at me. I turned to Lindsay. Her eyes were wet, pleading. But she hadn't defended me, hadn't told her husband he was wrong. That realization settled in my chest like ice. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart," I said softly. Then I looked at Chris, really looked at him, and I smiled. Not a warm smile, something else entirely. "Enjoy your holiday," I told him. I walked out of the manor with my head high, my back straight. Behind me, I heard Lindsay's voice rising, Chris's defensive tone. The cold November air hit my face as I stepped onto Park Avenue. A burden, a worthless burden. The words echoed with each step I took toward the subway. But instead of anger, I felt something else crystallizing inside me. Clarity, purpose. Chris had no idea who I really was, what I was capable of, what resources I actually had. And Lindsay. My daughter needed to see the truth about the man she'd married. By the time I reached my building on Madison Avenue, I'd made my decision. It was time to show them both exactly what kind of burden I could be. The elevator ride to my 12th floor apartment felt longer than usual. I kept seeing Lindsay's face, the way she'd looked at me across that table. Not quite defending me, but not quite abandoning me either. Caught in the middle, manipulated by a man who'd systematically isolated her from the one person who'd always protected her. I unlocked my door and stood in the entryway, looking at my home with new eyes. Modest, by Manhattan standards. Clean lines, comfortable furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed money. Exactly how I'd wanted it. I poured myself 2 fingers of Macallan 18 and sat in my reading chair. The leather creaked familiar beneath me. On the side table sat my current book, a first edition of Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor from 1949. Paid $12,000 for it at auction. Chris would probably call that wasteful. Chris, the self-made man, the rising star at NextGen Solutions with his vice president title and his $180,000 salary. He thought he knew success, thought he understood money and power. He had no idea. I thought back to 2 years ago when Lindsay first started bringing him around regularly, how Chris would glance around my apartment, doing mental calculations. 1 bedroom on Madison Avenue, decent view, modest furnishings. He'd sized me up and filed me away as comfortable retiree on a pension, maybe pulling in $4,000 or $5,000 a month. Harmless, irrelevant. I remembered one Sunday brunch particularly clearly. Lindsay was in the kitchen making coffee when Chris leaned over. "Must be tough," he'd said, voice dripping with false sympathy. "Going from the banking world to this." He gestured vaguely at my apartment. "But hey, at least you got out before the stress killed you, right?" I'd smiled and nodded. Let him think whatever he wanted. But I'd noticed things too. The Rolex Submariner on his wrist, $42,000 retail. The Italian shoes, $3,000 easy. The casual mention of a weekend in the Hamptons, staying at a friend's place. All on a salary that should have left him comfortable, but not extravagant. Either Chris had family money he wasn't mentioning, or he was getting income from somewhere else. I'd filed that observation away. Didn't seem important at the time. Now, sitting in my chair with the taste of whiskey on my tongue, it seemed very important indeed. I set down my glass and walked to my study. Behind my desk hung a painting, abstract expressionism, nothing remarkable. I removed it carefully and revealed the wall safe underneath. Hadn't opened this in 2 years, not since I'd officially retired and decided to step back from active management. The combination still came easily to my fingers. The heavy door swung open. Inside, documents, contracts, account statements, Turner Capital Partners, my private investment fund, assets under management, $127 million. Nobody in my family knew it existed. Not Lindsay. Certainly not Chris. After my wife Sarah died 15 years ago, I'd made a choice. I could have retired an obvious luxury, bought a penthouse, flaunted the wealth I'd accumulated. Or I could live simply, invest wisely through trusted advisors, and let Lindsay make her own way in the world without the complications that serious money brings. I'd chosen simplicity, chosen to be comfortable retired banker Robert, instead of multimillionaire investor Robert Turner. Looking at these documents now, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. If I'd protected Lindsay or just made her vulnerable to predators like Chris. My phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay. "Dad, I'm so sorry about tonight. Chris had too much to drink. Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message. No, he was wrong. No, you didn't deserve that. Just excuses. I typed back. "Nothing to apologize for, sweetheart. Enjoy your evening." I pulled out my chessboard, the antique set I'd inherited from my own father. Set up a problem I'd been working on. White to move, mate in 7. But my mind wasn't on chess tonight. Chris thought I was a burden. Thought I was worthless. The man had expensive tastes on a modest salary. He'd isolated my daughter, spoken to me with contempt. And I was supposed to just accept it? Fade quietly into the background? I thought about Sarah. What she would say if she were here. She'd always been the fierce one, the protector. "Rob," she'd tell me, "you're too nice. Sometimes people need to learn consequences." I moved my knight on the board, then my bishop. The solution to the chess problem became clear. Check, check, checkmate. I needed information first. Facts, numbers, evidence. The next morning, I made a phone call to an old acquaintance from my Goldman days. Not a friend exactly, but someone who owed me a favor from way back. 20 minutes later, I had a name. Marcus Green, private investigator, former FBI, specializes in financial crimes. I set up a meeting for the following week. As I hung up, my phone rang. Lindsay. "Hey, Dad," she said, voice careful. "How are you?" "Fine, sweetheart. Just fine." "About last night." "Lindsay," I interrupted gently, "you don't need to explain anything. Chris was right about one thing. You two need your space. Build your own life together." Silence on the other end. I could almost hear her relief. "So you're not mad?" "Not at all," I lied smoothly. "In fact, I'm thinking of taking it easy this holiday season. Maybe you and Chris should have Christmas to yourselves. Start your own traditions." "Dad, you don't have to." "I want to," I said. "Really. It's time." We talked for a few more minutes, surface pleasantries, before saying goodbye. I sat back in my chair, looking out at Central Park below. The trees were bare, winter coming on. Chris thought he'd won. Thought he'd successfully pushed me out. He had no idea the game had just begun. And this time, I was playing to win. The detective's office was tucked away on a quiet street in Chelsea, third floor of an old brick building. Marcus Green didn't advertise. You either knew about him or you didn't. I found out about him through an acquaintance from my Goldman days, someone who owed me a favor from way back. One phone call and I had Marcus's number. Another call and I had an appointment for the following Monday. The office was exactly what I expected. Functional. No frills. Metal desk, filing cabinets, computer monitors on a side table, a framed certificate from Quantico on the wall. Marcus himself was early 50s, graying at the temples, the kind of build that said he still worked out, but had stopped trying to impress anyone. "Mr. Turner," he said, shaking my hand. Firm grip, direct eye contact. "How can I help you?" I laid it out, plain. No drama, no emotion, just facts. My son-in-law, Christopher Morrison, vice president at NextGen Solutions, salary $180,000 a year, living in a $3.2 million townhouse in Tribeca, wearing a $42,000 watch, taking weekend trips that should be beyond his means. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "You think he's got money coming from somewhere else?" Marcus said when I finished. Not a question. "I know he does," I replied. "I just need you to find out where and how much. Financial investigations take time. Bank records, offshore accounts, corporate filings. Could take weeks, maybe longer. I've got time." Marcus quoted me $15,000 for the initial investigation. I wrote him a check on the spot, drawn from an account Chris didn't know existed. We shook hands again and I left. Walking back to the subway, I felt something shift inside me. For years I'd played the role of harmless retiree. Stepped back. Let Chris push me aside while I kept the peace for Lindsay's sake. Not anymore. That evening, my phone rang. Lindsay. "Hey, Dad," she said, voice careful, uncertain. "I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay after, Thanksgiving." "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Really?" Chris feels terrible about what he said. He was stressed, had too much wine. You know how it is. I could hear Chris in the background, his voice too low to make out words, probably feeding her the lines. "These things happen," I said smoothly. "Don't worry about it." "So you're not mad?" "Not at all. In fact, I've been thinking about what Chris said, about giving you two more space. Maybe it's time I step back a bit, let you build your own life together." Relief flooded her voice. "Dad, you don't have to." "I want to," I interrupted gently. "Really? You're adults. You don't need your old father hovering around all the time." We talked for a few more minutes. Surface conversation about her work, her latest campaign. When we hung up, I could imagine Chris smiling, thinking he'd won. Let him think that. Let him relax, get comfortable, believe I was backing down. Meanwhile, I'd be watching, learning, preparing. The days crept toward Christmas. Lindsay invited me for dinner, but I declined politely. "You two enjoy it together," I told her. "Start your own traditions." She sounded disappointed, but didn't push. Chris probably celebrated my absence with extra champagne. Christmas morning, I sat in my apartment alone, made myself coffee, scrambled some eggs. The city was quiet outside, that rare hush that only comes on major holidays. I pulled out my chess set and worked through a particularly complex endgame problem while classical music played softly from my speakers. Around noon, I opened my copy of The Intelligent Investor. First edition, 1949, purchased at auction for $12,000. Chris would probably scoff at that. 12 grand for an old book? What a waste. But Benjamin Graham understood something that men like Chris never would. Real wealth wasn't about appearances. It was about patience, strategy, and knowing when to make your move. I read for hours, making notes in the margins of my notebook. Not about investing, about Chris, about patterns I'd noticed, questions I needed answered. My phone buzzed with a text from Lindsay, a photo of her and Chris in front of their Christmas tree, both wearing matching sweaters and holding champagne glasses. "Merry Christmas, Dad! Missing you today." I zoomed in on the photo, studying details. New decorations, expensive looking. Chris's watch caught the light in the photo. Behind them, through their window, I could see part of their neighbor's townhouse. I texted back, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Beautiful tree." What I didn't add, I was studying that photo like a chess position. Every detail mattered. Every clue added up. That evening, I logged into my online chess account. Played 3 games against opponents rated higher than me. Won 2, lost 1. The mental exercise kept me sharp, but the whole time, part of my mind was elsewhere. Thinking about Chris, about Lindsay, about the game that had truly begun. Chris thought he'd isolated me, thought he'd won by pushing me out of their lives. He had no idea I was just getting started. 2 days after Christmas, my phone rang. "Marcus, Mr. Turner, I've got some preliminary findings. Nothing conclusive yet, but interesting. Can you come by the office?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. 10 o'clock. I hung up and stood at my window, looking out over Central Park. The trees were bare, skeletal against the winter sky. But spring would come. It always did. And when it did, I'd be ready. Chris wanted me out of his life? Fine. But he was about to learn that some burdens don't disappear just because you wish them away. Some burdens come back to collect what they're owed, and I was patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. Marcus's preliminary report was thin but promising. Bank statements showing deposits that didn't match Chris's salary schedule. Credit card charges at restaurants and clubs that a $180,000 salary shouldn't comfortably afford. Purchase receipts for luxury items. "He's spending more than he makes," Marcus said, spreading papers across his desk. "Question is where the extra money's coming from. Can you find out?" "Given time and access, yes. But I'll need to go deeper. Corporate records, tax filings, possibly offshore accounts. That means more resources, more time." "How much?" "Another 10,000, maybe more if we hit complications." I wrote another check. "Find everything." Marcus studied me for a moment. "Mind if I ask what you're planning to do with this information?" "Protect my daughter," I said simply. He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Give me 6 weeks." 6 weeks. I could wait. 6 weeks. January crept by. New York settled into its familiar winter rhythm. Cold winds, gray skies, people hunched into their coats on the subway. I established a new routine. Morning walk through Central Park, regardless of weather. Lunch at various cafes around the Upper East Side. Afternoons reading or playing chess online. Evenings spent reviewing old investment documents, refreshing my memory on corporate law, SEC regulations, whistleblower protections. Just light reading, nothing suspicious. Lindsay called occasionally. Brief conversations, surface level. She mentioned that Chris had gotten a promotion, some new title that meant more responsibility. I congratulated her warmly, didn't ask questions. But I noticed she didn't mention money. Didn't mention bonuses or salary increases. Interesting. 2 weeks into January, I made another call. This one to a lawyer. Veronica Chang's firm occupied the 15th floor of a building on Wall Street. Chang and Associates specialized in corporate law, particularly whistleblower cases and SEC compliance issues. I'd researched her thoroughly. 45 years old, partner in her firm, impeccable reputation. Her assistant showed me into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the financial district. "Mr. Turner," Veronica said, entering briskly. Charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, carrying an iPad and a leather portfolio. "Your message said you needed consultation on a sensitive corporate matter?" "Potentially," I said. "I may come into possession of information about financial irregularities at a public company. I want to understand my options for reporting it legally." She sat down, opened her iPad. "Are you employed by this company?" "No. I'd be receiving the information from an independent investigation." "And the information would pertain to?" "Possible fraud, kickbacks, offshore accounts, corporate vice president level." Veronica's expression didn't change, but I saw the spark of interest in her eyes. "SEC whistleblower protections could apply. Tell me more." We talked for 90 minutes. She explained the legal framework, how to submit anonymous tips to the SEC, what documentation would be needed, how to ensure everything was done by the book. Her rate was $450 an hour, worth every penny. "One more thing," I said as we finished. "This stays confidential. Attorney-client privilege." "Absolutely," she confirmed. "You have my word." Walking back to the subway, I felt pieces clicking into place. Marcus was gathering evidence. Veronica would ensure I used it legally. All I needed now was patience. 2 weeks later, Lindsay called. "Dad, I wanted to invite you to my birthday dinner. Just a small thing. Me and Chris and a few friends. Nothing big." "When is it?" "Next Thursday. 7 o'clock at that Italian place near our house." I checked my calendar, already knowing what I'd say. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I've got a prior commitment that evening." "Rain check?" Disappointed silence. "Oh, okay, sure. We'll do something, just the two of us. Maybe brunch the following weekend." "Yeah, that would be nice." After we hung up, I sat there wondering if she'd actually invited me, or if Chris had forgotten to tell her I'd declined. Didn't matter. Either way, I was keeping my distance. Let Chris think he'd won. Let him relax into his comfortable corruption. 3 weeks after my meeting with Veronica, Marcus called. "Mr. Turner, you need to see this. In person." "When?" "Now would be good." I grabbed my coat and headed for Chelsea. Marcus's desk was covered with documents. Bank statements, wire transfer records, emails. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his expression. Excitement. The look of a hunter who'd found the trail. "Your son-in-law's been very busy," Marcus said. He walked me through it. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands. $340,000. Transferred in irregular amounts over the past 2 years. Wire transfers from shell companies that, when traced back, connected to Next-Gen Solutions subsidiaries. "He's taking kickbacks," I said quietly. "Looks that way. I've also got email exchanges discussing consulting fees and commission structures that have nothing to do with his official job duties." I picked up one of the printouts. Read Chris's words. Casual, arrogant, discussing money like it was his due. "Keep digging," I told Marcus. "I want everything. Every transaction, every email, every connection." "That'll take time." "I've got time." Back in my apartment that evening, I poured myself a whiskey and stood at my window. The lights of Manhattan glittered below. Somewhere out there, in a $3 million townhouse, Chris was probably having dinner with my daughter. Probably complaining about work stress. Probably checking his watch and his phone and his offshore account balance. Probably thinking he was clever, untouchable. I sipped my whiskey and smiled. In chess, there's a concept called the long game. You don't take pieces immediately just because you can. You position. You prepare. You wait for the exact right moment when your opponent realizes they're already checkmated. They just haven't seen it yet. Chris had called me a worthless burden. Soon he'd understand exactly what that burden could do. And by the time he realized what was happening, it would be far too late to stop it. Marcus called again 3 weeks later. "You're going to want to see this," he said, and I heard something in his voice. Satisfaction. The tone of someone who just solved a particularly difficult puzzle. I was at his office within the hour. The documents spread across his desk told a story I hadn't expected. One of the companies paying Chris those mysterious consulting fees was called Future Tech Ventures. I recognized the name immediately. Future Tech Ventures was a portfolio company of Turner Capital Partners. My company. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. The irony was almost too perfect. Chris had been taking kickbacks from a company I owned, and he had no idea. All those vague deals he'd been so proud of, all that money flowing into his offshore accounts, I'd been indirectly paying him the whole time. "What's the connection?" Marcus asked, watching my reaction. "Future Tech is involved in one of my investments," I said carefully. "Tell me more about these payments." Marcus pulled up another document. Chris had lobbied for a contract between Next-Gen Solutions and Future Tech Ventures. $8.5 million. In exchange, he'd received $170,000 in consulting fees, routed through 2 shell companies. "That's insider trading," I said quietly. "Conflict of interest." He was getting paid to steer his company's business to a vendor he had a financial relationship with. Exactly. And it gets better. I found 2 more similar deals. Different amounts, same pattern. Your son-in-law's been running this scheme for at least 3 years. I studied the documents. Dates, amounts, email exchanges where Chris casually discussed his commission structure with people I'd never heard of. So confident, so careless. "I need copies of everything," I said. "Can you organize it into a comprehensive dossier?" "Already done. 47 pages, indexed and cross-referenced. Bank records, emails, wire transfer receipts. Everything you'd need for a legal case." I met with Veronica again the next afternoon. Her office, same conference room with the view of the financial district. I have documentation of corporate fraud, I told her, sliding Marcus's dossier across the table. Kickbacks, offshore accounts, conflict of interest. What's my cleanest path to report this? Veronica spent an hour reviewing the documents. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious. This is substantial, Robert. If reported properly, the SEC would be very interested. We're talking potential criminal charges, not just civil penalties. I want to do this right, anonymously, by the book, no connection to me. She nodded. I can prepare an anonymous whistleblower submission to the SEC. With documentation this thorough, they'll open an investigation immediately. The source would be protected under federal law. How long? I can have the submission ready in 2 weeks. After that, it's in their hands. Could be weeks or months before they act. Do it. Spring turned to summer. I maintained my routine. Morning walks, afternoon reading, evening chess. Lindsay called occasionally. Brief conversations where she sounded increasingly strained. I didn't press. Chris, I imagined, was feeling quite secure. His troublesome father-in-law had backed off. His deals were flowing. His offshore account was growing. Then came the summer evening that changed everything. I was sitting in my reading chair, glass of Macallan 18 in hand, watching the city lights twinkle below. It was late, nearly midnight. I'd been reading about endgame theory, how the simplest positions often held the deepest complexity. My phone rang at 3 minutes past midnight. Lindsay's name on the screen. Dad! Her voice was high, panicked. Are you watching CNN? Are you seeing this? I'm not watching anything, sweetheart. What's wrong? Turn it on, right now. It's about Chris. They're saying terrible things. Accusations of corruption, financial fraud. Dad, what's happening? I reached for my remote, flipped on the television. CNN was indeed on, and I recognized the anchor immediately. Daniel King, their financial corruption specialist. Documents obtained by CNN show a pattern of alleged kickbacks and conflicts of interest, spanning multiple years, King was saying. Behind him, a photo of Chris appeared on screen, his professional headshot from the Next Gen website. Below it, a caption. VP accused of corruption. I took a slow sip of my whiskey, watching the screen with clinical interest. Christopher Morrison, Vice President of Corporate Development at Next Gen Solutions, allegedly received substantial payments through offshore accounts in exchange for steering company contracts to specific vendors, King continued. The documentation provided by an anonymous source includes bank records, wire transfers, and internal communications. Dad? Lindsay's voice cracked. Did you hear what I said? I heard it, sweetheart. Chris thinks he's saying you did this, that you somehow set him up, that this is revenge for Thanksgiving. Please tell me that's not true. I watched the screen. They were showing numbers now. Dollar amounts, account numbers with the middle digits redacted. Everything Marcus had found, filtered through the SEC's investigation and leaked to the media. Lindsay, I said calmly, I'm a 64-year-old retired banker, living on a pension of $4,200 a month. How exactly would I have the resources or connections to orchestrate something like this? Silence on the other end. Then a muffled sound, Chris's voice in the background, sharp with panic. I have to go, Lindsay said. Chris needs me, but Dad, please. I'm here if you need me, I interrupted gently. Always. She hung up. I turned up the volume on the television. Daniel King was interviewing someone from the SEC now, discussing the scope of financial fraud investigations, what penalties Chris might face if the allegations proved true. I finished my whiskey slowly, savoring it. Outside my window, Manhattan glittered like a game board under lights. Somewhere out there, in a townhouse in Tribeca, Chris Morrison was having the worst night of his life, and somewhere else, justice was finally being served. The game had moved into the endgame, and in chess, as in life, the endgame was where patient players claimed their victories. The broadcast continued for another 20 minutes. More details, more documents, more financial experts weighing in on the severity of the allegations. I watched it all with the detachment of someone observing a chess match. They had already won 3 moves ago. Every number they cited, every transaction they highlighted. I'd seen it all weeks ago in Marcus's reports. My phone rang again. Lindsay. Dad, I need you to tell me the truth. Her voice was harder now, more controlled. Did you have anything to do with this? With what, sweetheart? Don't play games. The news. The accusations. Chris says you're behind it somehow, that you've been plotting against him. I stood and walked to my window. Midnight Manhattan spread below, 1,000 stories playing out in 1,000 lit windows. In one of them, Chris was probably pacing, his phone ringing off the hook, his perfect life crumbling. Lindsay, I'm a simple pensioner. I don't have the resources or connections to orchestrate a federal investigation. If Chris is being investigated, perhaps he should ask himself why. What did he do to attract this attention? He didn't do anything, but her voice wavered, just slightly. Then he has nothing to worry about. The truth will come out. I heard Chris shouting in the background, too muffled to make out words. I have to go, Lindsay said, but we're not done talking about this. She hung up without saying goodbye. I considered going to bed. It was late, after all, but something told me the night wasn't over yet. So I poured another small measure of whiskey and waited. 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from Lindsay. Chris wants to talk to you. Coming to your building. I smiled. Of course he did. I changed from my reading clothes into proper trousers and a button-down shirt, made fresh coffee, straightened the magazines on my coffee table. If Chris wanted a confrontation, we'd have it on my terms, in my space. The doorman called up 20 minutes later. Mr. Turner, you have visitors. A Mr. and Mrs. Morrison? Send them up, please. I opened my door before they could knock. Lindsay looked exhausted, her makeup smeared from crying. Chris looked like a cornered animal, red-faced, eyes wild, his expensive suit rumpled. Come in, I said pleasantly. Can I offer you coffee? Chris stormed past me into the living room. Cut the act, Robert. We both know what you did. I'm sorry, I don't follow. I gestured to the sofa. Please, sit. Don't play dumb. Chris's voice rose. That report? Those documents. CNN doesn't just get anonymous tips out of nowhere. You did this. Somehow you orchestrate this whole thing. I sat in my reading chair, crossing my legs comfortably. That's quite an accusation. Do you have any proof? His face went even redder. I don't need proof. The timing is too convenient. I embarrass you at Thanksgiving, and now suddenly I'm being investigated? You expect me to believe that's coincidence? What I expect, I said calmly, is that if you've been taking money you shouldn't have, you'd face consequences eventually. These things have a way of catching up with people. I haven't done anything illegal. Then you'll be fine. False accusations can be disproven. Lindsay stood between us, her hands shaking. Dad, please, if you know something, just tell us. Chris's lawyer needs to know what we're dealing with. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she'd positioned herself slightly in front of Chris, still protecting him despite everything, still choosing him over the evidence of her own eyes. Lindsay, I said gently, I don't know anything more than what I saw on the news. Your husband is being accused of financial fraud. If he's innocent, his lawyer will clear it up. If he's not... I shrugged. Well, that's between him and the authorities. Chris stepped forward, his fists clenched. You smug old man. You think you're clever? You think you've won something? I didn't stand, didn't move, just looked up at him with the same calm expression I'd worn when he called me a worthless burden. Chris, I said quietly, at Thanksgiving, you told me to skip Christmas. You called me a worthless burden in front of my daughter in a restaurant full of people. You've spent 2 years trying to push me out of Lindsay's life, manipulating her, isolating her from the one parent she has left. His jaw tightened. Lindsay's face went pale. Now you're being investigated for financial crimes, I continued. Whether I had anything to do with that or not, you should ask yourself, what kind of man makes enemies of his family? What kind of man treats people with such contempt that they might want to see him face consequences? This isn't over, Chris hissed. I will prove you did this. And when I do, when you do what? I raised an eyebrow. Sue a retired banker with a $4,200 monthly pension? Good luck affording that lawyer. The color drained from his face, because in that moment, I think he finally understood the scope of what was happening, the fact that his money, his connections, his arrogance, none of it would save him now. Lindsay pulled at his arm. Chris, let's go. This isn't helping. He yanked away from her, pointing a finger at me. You're a manipulative old man. Lindsay, can't you see what he's doing? He's trying to destroy us. But Lindsay wasn't looking at him. She was looking at me, and I saw something shift in her eyes, the first crack in the facade, the first real doubt. Let's go home, she said quietly. Please. Chris stared at me for another long moment, breathing hard. Then he turned and stormed out. Lindsay followed, pausing at my door. Dad, she whispered, I don't know what's true anymore. Then maybe it's time to start asking questions, I said gently. Real questions, not the ones Chris wants you to ask. She left without another word. I closed my door and returned to my chair. The television was still on, muted now, showing a repeat of the same story. Chris's photo, the accusations, the investigation. I picked up my phone and typed a brief text to Marcus. Well done. His response came immediately. Just doing my job. I turned off the television and sat in the quiet darkness, looking out at the city. Chris had called me a worthless burden, had tried to erase me from my daughter's life, had built his success on corruption and arrogance. And now he was learning what I'd known all along. Some burdens don't disappear. Some burdens wait patiently, building their case, gathering their evidence. Some burdens know exactly how to make you pay. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a freight train. My phone started ringing at 7. Lindsay. I let it go to voicemail. Then Chris's lawyer. Voicemail. 3 reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. Voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. I made coffee and sat by my window, watching the sun rise over Central Park. The city was waking up to Chris Morrison's scandal. Front page of the financial section. Lead story on every business news channel. His professional headshot displayed on screens across America, with words like corruption and fraud underneath. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring both the brew and the moment. By noon, Next Gen Solutions had issued a statement. Chris's duties were suspended pending investigation. The SEC had opened a formal inquiry. His lawyer, some expensive firm from Midtown, was already positioning for damage control. Lindsay called again. This time I answered. Dad! Her voice was raw, exhausted. I need to see you. Just you and me, please. Of course, sweetheart. When and where? There's a coffee shop on Columbus Avenue, near my office. Can you meet me in an hour? I could hear Chris shouting something in the background. She hung up before I could respond. The coffee shop was one of those artisanal places where they charged $8 for a cappuccino and called it craft. Lindsay was already there, hunched over a corner table, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes. She stood when she saw me, and for a moment I thought she might hug me, but she just gestured to the seat across from her. Thanks for coming, she said quietly. I ordered a black coffee and sat down. Waited. Let her gather her thoughts. Chris says you orchestrated all of this, she began, that you hired investigators, planted evidence, destroyed his reputation because he embarrassed you at Thanksgiving. And what do you think? She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. I don't know what to think anymore, Dad. Everything's falling apart. His lawyer says he could face prison time, millions in fines. His career is over. And he keeps saying you did this. I pulled a folder from my bag. Marcus had prepared a sanitized version of his findings. Just the facts. No mention of sources. Lindsay, I want you to look at something. Not because I want to hurt you, but because you deserve to know the truth about the man you married. I slid the folder across the table. Bank statements showing transfers to the Cayman Islands. Emails discussing consulting fees and commission structures. Financial records that didn't match Chris's legitimate income. She opened it slowly, scanning the pages. I watched her face as comprehension dawned, the color draining from her cheeks, her hands starting to shake. These are Chris's accounts? Read the emails, I said gently. She did. One in particular, dated 2 years ago, where Chris discussed using the Turner connection to open doors at a potential client. Another where he joked about his meal ticket wife. Oh, she whispered. That was all. Just, oh. Lindsay, look at me. I waited until she met my eyes. Did I want him exposed? Yes. Did I hire people to investigate him? Yes. But I didn't plant anything. I didn't fabricate anything. Everything in that folder is real. Your husband has been taking kickbacks for years, using your name, your connections, your reputation to advance himself while stealing from his company. A tear rolled down her cheek. She brushed it away angrily. Why didn't you tell me before all this? Would you have believed me? Or would Chris have convinced you I was just a jealous father trying to destroy your marriage? She looked away. We both knew the answer. He used you, I continued quietly, and he tried to push me out of your life so I wouldn't see what he was doing, so there'd be no one to protect you when it all came crashing down. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and winced. It's Chris. He wants to know where I am. He's furious I came to see you. You're 33 years old, Lindsay. He doesn't get to control who you see. You don't understand. He's so angry, scared. He thinks the whole world is against him. She paused. Including me. Is he right? She stared at the documents spread across the table. The evidence of her husband's corruption, his manipulation, his lies. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know anything anymore. We talked for another hour. I didn't push. Didn't demand she leave him or make any decisions. Just let her process, asked questions, helped her see what had been invisible for so long. When we finally left, she hugged me. Really hugged me, like she used to before Chris. I'm sorry, Dad, she said into my shoulder, for not seeing it, for not defending you, for believing his lies about you. You have nothing to apologize for, I said. You loved someone. That's not a crime. But as I watched her walk away, phone already ringing with another call from Chris, I wondered how long it would take her to make the choice that needed making. That evening, the news broke that Chris had hired a PR firm, $35,000 for damage control. They'd issued a statement painting him as the victim of a vindictive father-in-law who couldn't accept his daughter's marriage. I almost laughed. The man was drowning, and his solution was to throw money at image consultants. The reporters weren't buying it. They wanted to know about the offshore accounts, the suspicious transfers, the emails. Chris's press conference the next day was a disaster. Sweating under the lights, defensive, angry. Every question made him look guiltier. I watched it from my apartment, glass of whiskey in hand. The hunter had become the hunted, and he had no idea how to handle it. A week passed, then another. Chris's situation deteriorated with each news cycle. The SEC investigation expanded. More documents surfaced. Another $20,000 in questionable payments. Another shell company. Another smoking gun. And through it all, Chris kept pointing fingers at me. Robert Turner orchestrated this, he told anyone who would listen. He's manipulating everything behind the scenes. If only he knew how right he was. 2 weeks after the initial story broke, Lindsay called me. Dad, can we meet? I have something I need to tell you. We met at the same coffee shop. This time she looked different. Calmer. More resolved. I'm leaving him, she said without preamble. I've already talked to a divorce lawyer. I'm filing next week. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I'm proud of you. Don't be proud yet. Chris is threatening to fight it. He says if I leave him now, he'll expose you. Tell everyone you were behind the investigation, that you manipulated the media, that you're the real criminal. She laughed bitterly, as if he has any credibility left. Let him try, I said calmly. He has no proof because I covered my tracks carefully. Marcus worked under confidentiality. Veronica's protected by attorney-client privilege, and the SEC received an anonymous tip. There's no paper trail leading back to me. Still, he'll make our lives miserable if he can. Lindsay, your husband is drowning. People who are drowning flail around, grab at anything, pull others down with them. Don't let him pull you down too. She nodded slowly. There's something else. I want you to tell me the truth about something. Here it was, the question I'd been waiting for. You said you hired investigators. Where did you get the money? Your pension is $4,200 a month. Marcus's firm charges thousands. So does that lawyer, Veronica Chang. Where did the money come from? I looked at my daughter, this smart, perceptive woman I'd raised. She'd figured out there was more to the story. Time to show her how much more. I need you to come with me somewhere, I said. Tomorrow. Can you take the afternoon off work? Where are we going? To meet Veronica. There's something I need to show you. Something I should have shown you a long time ago. The next day, we met at Veronica's office on Wall Street. The lawyer had prepared everything I'd requested, laid out on the conference table in her office. Lindsay walked in, confused. Dad, what's going on? Sit down, sweetheart. Veronica nodded politely and left us alone. I opened the first folder. Turner Capital Partners. Account statements. Investment portfolios. Property holdings. Asset allocations. Lindsay's eyes went wide as she scanned the numbers. Dad, these accounts, this says $127 million. That's correct. But I don't understand. You're retired. You live in that one-bedroom apartment. You said you live on your pension. I do live on my pension, I said. These funds are separate, managed through trustees. I haven't touched them in years except to pay for your education, and now to pay for the investigation that exposed your husband. She stared at me like I was a stranger. Who are you? I'm the same person I've always been, but after your mother died, I made a choice. I didn't want money to define our relationship. Didn't want you choosing friends or partners based on wealth. I wanted you to build a real life, with real people who cared about you for who you are. So you pretended to be poor? Not poor. Comfortable. Middle class. And it worked, didn't it? You built a career on your own merit. You made your own way. Until I married a man who used me anyway, she said bitterly. That's not on you. Chris is a professional manipulator. He would have found an angle regardless. I pulled out another document. But here's the part he doesn't know. Will never know. One of the companies that paid him those kickbacks. Future Tech Ventures? That's mine too. Portfolio company of Turner Capital Partners. Lindsay's mouth fell open. You mean... I mean your husband spent 3 years taking illegal payments from deals connected to my investments. He thought he was so clever, skimming money off contracts, building his secret fortune. The whole time he was indirectly taking money from the man he called a worthless burden. She started laughing. Not happy laughter, something wilder, almost hysterical. Oh my God, he has no idea, does he? That you've been... what, pulling strings this whole time? Not pulling strings. I only learned about the connection when Marcus did his investigation, but once I knew, yes, I made sure the SEC got every detail they needed to take him down properly. Lindsay looked at the documents again, really seeing them now. The scope of my resources, the network of investments, the quiet power I'd wielded while pretending to be nothing more than a retired banker. Who else knows about this? She asked. Veronica, my fund managers, a few trustees, that's all. And now you. Why are you telling me now? Because you deserve to understand what Chris really married into. He thought he was marrying the daughter of a comfortable middle-class retiree, someone he could manage, control, eventually inherit from if he played his cards right. He had no idea that his father-in-law could destroy him with a few phone calls if provoked enough. And you did destroy him. No, I corrected gently. Chris destroyed himself. I just made sure the world could see what he'd been hiding. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside the window, Manhattan stretched endlessly, full of people pursuing their own versions of success, their own games of power and money. What happens now? Lindsay finally asked. Now? You divorce him, move on, build a better life, and I go back to being your dad. Just your dad. With maybe a little less pretense between us. She shook her head slowly, still processing. This is insane. All of it. The money, the investigation, the fact that you've been secretly wealthy this entire time while wearing the same 3 sweaters. I shrugged. The sweaters are comfortable. And despite everything, the scandal, the divorce, the revelations, she laughed, really laughed. My daughter was going to be okay. And Chris Morrison? He was about to learn that some burdens carry more weight than others. Chris's desperation manifested 2 weeks later in the most predictable way possible. A press conference. He'd rented a room at a midtown hotel, invited every media outlet he could think of, and staged what he called a statement to clear my name. I watched it from my apartment, curious to see how far he'd dig himself in. The man who appeared on screen looked nothing like the confident vice president who'd dismissed me as worthless at Thanksgiving. His suit hung loose. He'd lost weight. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hands trembled as he gripped the podium. I'm here today to reveal the truth about what's happened to me, he began, voice shaking with manufactured emotion. I've been the victim of a coordinated attack by my father-in-law, Robert Turner, who couldn't accept that his daughter had moved on with her life. I took a sip of coffee. This should be good. Robert Turner hired investigators to fabricate evidence against me. He manipulated the SEC, fed false information to the media, all because I had the audacity to suggest he give us space during the holidays. Several reporters shouted questions. Chris ignored them, plowing forward with his script. The so-called evidence against me is circumstantial at best, illegally obtained at worst. My lawyers are preparing a defamation suit against everyone involved in this conspiracy. A reporter interrupted. Mr. Morrison, the SEC has confirmed 3 separate offshore accounts in your name containing over $500,000. How do you explain that? Chris's face went red. Those accounts were for legitimate business purposes. And the emails discussing kickbacks? Taken out of context. What about the Future Tech Ventures contract, where you received $170,000 in undisclosed payments? Chris was floundering now, sweat beading on his forehead. This is exactly what I'm talking about. A coordinated smear campaign. I turned off the television. Watching him self-destruct wasn't satisfying anymore. It was just sad. My phone rang. Lindsay. Did you see it? She asked. Parts of it. He's lost his mind, Dad. Completely lost it. His lawyer told him not to do the press conference, but he insisted. She paused. I filed the divorce papers this morning. How do you feel? Relieved? Sad? Angry? All of it at once. Another pause. I'm moving out of the townhouse tomorrow. I can't stay there anymore. I was wondering, could I stay with you for a few days? Just until I find my own place? My chest tightened with something that wasn't quite triumph, but close. Of course, sweetheart. Stay as long as you need. Thanks, Dad. I'll see you tomorrow. She moved in the next day with 3 suitcases and a lot of emotional baggage. I gave her my bedroom, took the couch. We fell into an easy routine. Morning coffee together, her leaving for work, me working on my chess puzzles and reading. Chris's press conference had backfired spectacularly. The SEC, apparently insulted by his accusations of fabrication, announced they were expanding their investigation. Financial news outlets dug deeper, finding more questionable transactions, more conflicts of interest. The number grew, not just the original $510,000, but another $420,000 in previously undiscovered accounts. Chris's lawyer quit. His second lawyer lasted 3 days before resigning, citing irreconcilable differences with the client. Then came the call I'd been half expecting. Mr. Turner, this is Jonathan Hayes. CEO of Next Gen Solutions. The man Chris had been stealing from for 3 years wanted to meet me. Interesting. We met at a Starbucks on 42nd Street, neutral territory. Hayes was late 50s, silver hair, expensive but understated suit. He ordered a black coffee and got straight to business. "I want to thank you," he said without preamble. "For what?" "Don't play coy. I know you were behind the investigation that exposed Morrison. My security team did their homework." He held up a hand. "I'm not here to threaten you. Quite the opposite. Morrison was bleeding my company dry. His corruption could have destroyed us if it had gone on much longer. You saved NextGen." I sipped my coffee, saying nothing. "I also know you're more than just a retired banker with a pension," Hayes continued. "Turner Capital Partners. Impressive portfolio. Very quietly managed. Is there a point to this conversation, Mr. Hayes?" He smiled. "Direct. I like that." "Yes, there's a point. I want to discuss an investment opportunity. NextGen is looking for new partners. Serious partners with both capital and integrity. I think Turner Capital Partners might be interested." The irony was almost too perfect. Chris had spent 3 years trying to profit from NextGen through corruption, and now the company's CEO wanted to partner with the father-in-law Chris had called worthless. "I'll have my fund managers reach out to your people," I said. "We'll see if there's a fit." We shook hands. As Hayes left, I sat there for a moment, savoring the symmetry of it all. Chris had tried to build his empire on my daughter's connections while treating me like garbage. Now his empire was rubble, and I was being courted by the very company he'd tried to exploit. Chess players call it zugzwang, a position where any move makes things worse. Chris was in zugzwang, and he'd put himself there. The final pieces were falling into place. The courthouse was in Lower Manhattan, a gray building that had witnessed countless moments of justice over the decades. I sat in the back of the courtroom, just another face in the small crowd of observers. Lindsay sat beside me, her hand occasionally reaching for mine. Chris sat at the defendant's table with his third lawyer, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The confident, arrogant man from Thanksgiving was gone. In his place sat someone who seemed to have aged a decade in 8 months. The judge read the verdict with the flat efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "Christopher James Morrison, you have been found guilty of 12 counts of fraud, accepting unlawful gratuities, and filing false tax returns." Chris's shoulders slumped. He'd known this was coming, but hearing it still broke something in him. "The court sentences you to 8 years probation with strict oversight, a fine of $3,800,000, and permanent prohibition from working in any corporate or financial capacity." I watched Chris's face as the words landed, saw the last remnants of his pride crumble. His mouth opened slightly like he wanted to protest, but no words came out, just a small, broken sound. The judge continued listing conditions: regular check-ins with a probation officer, mandatory financial disclosure, immediate asset liquidation to pay the fines. Lindsay squeezed my hand. I squeezed back. When it was over, Chris was led away. He didn't look at us, didn't look at anyone, just kept his eyes on the floor as they took him out. Outside the courthouse, Lindsay and I stood on the steps, watching the city move around us. "Is it wrong that I don't feel sorry for him?" she asked. "No," I said simply. "Actions have consequences. He made his choices." "Still, 8 years of probation, 3.8 million in fines. His career destroyed." "It's a lot. He stole from his company, took kickbacks, lied to you, manipulated you, tried to erase me from your life, and when caught, he blamed everyone but himself. This isn't too much. This is justice." She nodded slowly. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just, I loved him once, or thought I did. That's not your failure. That's his. You loved, honestly. He didn't." We walked to a nearby coffee shop, neither of us ready to go home yet. Over cappuccinos, Lindsay told me about the apartment she'd found. Nice place in the West Village, close to work. 1 bedroom, affordable. "Actually," I said, pulling an envelope from my jacket, "I wanted to give you something." She opened it. Inside were property deeds to a 2-bedroom condo in the West Village, purchased 5 years ago, held in trust for her. "Dad, what is this?" "Your mother and I bought it when you graduated college, just in case you ever needed it. I've been holding on to it, waiting for the right time." Her eyes filled with tears. "You've been planning for me all this time?" "Always. You're my daughter. That doesn't change, regardless of who you marry or what mistakes you make. I'll always have your back." She cried then, really cried. Not sad tears, something else. Relief, maybe, or gratitude, or just the release of 8 months of pressure. Several weeks later, I sat in my reading chair, the same one where I'd received Lindsay's panicked call about CNN. But this time, The city lights outside represented something different. Not the beginning of a plan, but the end of one. My phone rang. Lindsay. Hey, Dad. I was thinking maybe we could have dinner this Saturday? Just the two of us. And I'd like you to tell me about Mom. Real stories. Not the perfect memories we usually share, but the messy, honest stuff. What she was really like. I smiled. I'd love that. Should I make a reservation somewhere? Actually, I was thinking we could go to the manor, where this all started. Time to create some new memories there. The restaurant where Chris had called me a worthless burden, where this entire chain of events had begun. That sounds perfect, I said. I'll book a table. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, looking at the chess set on my side table. The endgame problem I'd been working on back in November, the night after Thanksgiving. I'd solved it months ago, but I'd left the pieces in place. Now I reset the board, started a new puzzle, new challenges, new strategies to explore. My phone buzzed with a text from Veronica. Next-gen partnership agreement finalized. Hayes is impressed. Turner Capital Partners now officially partnered with Next-Gen Solutions. I texted back a simple thanks. So Chris had tried to profit from Next-Gen through corruption and failed. Now I was partnering with them legitimately, building something sustainable and legal. The irony would have killed him if he'd known. But he didn't know. Would never know. And that was fine by me. I looked at the photo on my desk, Lindsay and me, 20 years ago. She'd been 13, grinning at the camera with her braces, my arm around her shoulders. I had a new photo now, taken last week. Lindsay and me in her new apartment, her looking genuinely happy for the first time in months. The weight I'd been carrying since Thanksgiving, the anger, the determination, the need for justice, had lifted. Not because I'd destroyed Chris Morrison, because I'd protected my daughter, shown her the truth, given her the tools to rebuild her life. Chris Morrison was a broken man now, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just a quiet sense that the scales had been balanced. He'd called me a worthless burden, and I'd shown him exactly what this burden could do when pushed. Justice served, family restored, life moving forward. The game was over, and I'd won. But the best part, it wasn't about winning. It was about Lindsay, free and safe, and ready to build a real life with real people who truly cared about her. That was worth more than any revenge. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching,